No, that was a bit. I meant to. But no, yeah. let's take it back from the top.
Take it back from the start proper.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Josh Kleckner, how you doing today?
Oh, dude, I'm fucking killing it. I've had way too much caffeine today.
Hell yeah.
I'm jittery. I feel like shit. I'm ready to talk, dude. You know what I mean?
Dude, that's how it's gonna be. That's a perfect state of mind to be in to talk about such a thing as free will.
Hell yeah, dude. Oh, I'm excited for this too because you're like a guy that I feel like like many people that I feel like I've known for a long time, but I've never really had a super long conversation with.
Yeah, I could see that. Because when did you start comedy?
In Philly, I started right whenever stuff lifted in the pandemic, so like a little over a year.
Okay.
I like dicked around before that in other places where I was living, but like I was never like really like doing it.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, no, dude, I'm excited too. I feel like that. I feel the same, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like socially uncomfortable. I immediately get more comfortable if there's a microphone involved. I'm like, I'm so much more confident talking. As long
Bro,
as
we
it's
all are. That's what all the comedians. I started last May, but I don't think people even knew I was around until maybe like December.
Oh yeah,
you know
dude, you just have to show up long enough to be like, I've seen this guy around a lot in the corner. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. Or like reference something that happened like last summer, and they're like, "You were there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was there, dude. What were you?"
Yeah.
But I also know what you mean. There's also like that moment of like you know somebody for a while, and then you break the seal with like, "Oh, we had a real conversation that night."
Yeah, dude, for sure. There's so many people that I've said hi to like a million times, and that's all I've ever said to them. It was like, "Yo, what's up?"
Yeah, but a friendly face, you know, smiling.
No,
you know
it's not a bad thing. I'm just saying.
Yeah. But I am really excited for this episode because. Usually with this podcast, it's like I have to like most people, especially comics, just want to talk about comedy or whatever. Yeah. And I have to be like, well, what is your passions outside of comedy? Like, so the podcast is about whatever you think you could talk about for 45 minutes. You know what I mean?
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
And you were like, usually people are like, I'm gonna have to think about that, or like, well, I could do this, or this. But you were just like, free will, dude.
Yeah,
that's
dude.
Exactly what I'm.
This is my thing, dude. This is my hill I'm dying on. No one agrees with me.
Okay.
I have people that my friends are sick of me talking about it, dude. But I'm just pretty sure that there is no free will, and I think we would all be better off if everyone would just accept it. You know, it's like I think there's like two bases on which I like kind of came to it.
Okay, wait. So before we get into that, and it may lead into that. Mm-hmm. So I guess this has to do with religion, right? For the most part, or spirituality.
I guess I think I take that for granted a little bit.
Okay. Because
I guess if you're religious and like believe in a soul or whatever, you're automatically going to not agree.
Okay. Interesting. So what's your religious background?
I grew up in Central PA and had like a very like that rural Christian kind of upbringing.
Almost Amish.
Almost Amish. So it's weird because my parents are divorced, so they would go to two different churches. So like my dad's family was like the evangelicals, crazy, rolling around on the ground, speaking tongues and shit.
Oh yeah.
And my mom's family was like Lutheran, which are just like diet Catholic.
Diet Catholic.
Yeah. No, there's no pope, but like the church service looks pretty much the same. Like very like just organized, like sit up, stand down, or whatever.
Yeah, the traditional, there's candles probably involved,
Yeah, all that shit. Yeah, so I think that was helpful for me in terms of like just figuring out what I think about stuff separately, because like your two parental figures are saying kind of different things to you.
True.
So and that's like your trusted source of information. So you kind of be like, oh well, one of them's not right.
Yeah, one of them's wrong,
or maybe both. You know what I mean? You kind of figure it out that way. So I definitely was just like so anxious and afraid of God and hell until like high school.
Yeah.
But then I kind of like started to just was like, well, maybe nothing, like maybe there's nothing, and that's kind of where I've been at just since.
Yeah.
I don't even remember like there was no like moment when I was like, oh, now I know that there's no God or whatever.
Right. But
it was just kind of a gradual like, I don't think I really believe this.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of same thing for me. Although I've kind of come back to see things in a different way. So it was like, I think like when you're young, you're like, all right, man in the sky. I get it, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, you're like, there's no way in hell there's a dude in the sky. I'm fucking, I'm an atheist out here. So we're like, you don't believe it.
Well, it's interesting because I think that there's like a lot of different paths to similar conclusions. Like people that are like, God is not like a person, but it's like God is the universe, or like God is everything. It's like, that's just not... Like, I think the conclusions that you'll draw with that framework, of, like, that worldview, are very similar to the conclusions that you can draw as an atheist. Like, you just kind of have a different mapping of how you get there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like for all practical reasons, it's pretty much the same thing.
Right. And that's kind of why I think. So that's what I mean. I think about it on like a metaphorical. Like it's not obviously not man in the sky or whatever. Yeah, but you're right. It is kind of just a mapping to the same. Like okay, well, there's not a man in the sky. You know.
Yeah.
You don't have to follow these rules. You just believe.
The important thing with religion is that they're telling you what to do. You know what I mean? And if you strip that away, it's all the same shit. Mm-hmm. You know. So
that makes sense. Yeah. So. There's two things to this theory.
Yeah, so just how I came to it. I feel like what happened with me and like thinking about free will is like, I've kind of realized that I believed it based on how I acted before I realized that I believed it. You know what I mean? I was
wow.
Like I kind of had a realization. I was like, oh, I treat people as if they don't have agency. Like that's kind of how I think about people. I thought I was being like super empathetic for a long time.
Yeah.
Just being like, oh, I really trying to understand like where this person is coming from and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then I kind of realized I'm viewing people as though like they're completely a sum of their experiences and their like biological predispositions rather than someone that is actually making a choice. Like someone do something that I should feel angry about towards me, someone will like wrong me. Yeah. And my immediate thought is to, instead of being like having an angry response, is to be like, explain why they did that. In my head.
Okay.
And I kind of realized that I was doing that.
Yeah.
And then I started to think more about like
why you were doing that.
Yeah, like what is in my worldview that is like having me come to these conclusions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's like twofold. One is like probably like the spiritual aspect of it, and like I was like a real sciencey guy in college. I went to school for physics and stuff, and so I mean I'm not doing anything with physics, but I think it like definitely informed a large part of my worldview, and that in conjunction with like a long history of terrible mental health and like the coping mechanisms that I built up to deal with that and get better in that sense also kind of ended up shaping my worldview and how I think about things.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because I think a big part of like agency is like obviously like making decisions and stuff like that, right? But I think whenever you have like really shitty mental health, you have all these thoughts that are like,
not your thoughts.
That's not me. Yeah, dude, where'd that come from? You know what I mean? You start to really distrust your emotions to some degree. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you have like anxiety or whatever, like this would happen to me all the time where like I'd have to go through these exercises where like I'd be at a party or something like that and I would say something and be like, oh, everyone hates you and they want you to die because you said this thing. And you know logically that that's not true, but it still feels as though that's true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're like, I don't know, starting to really, if you have to really ingrain that into your thinking and you start to think, process your emotions more logically than like actually like acting on them, you kind of build up a different idea of like how the brain works and like what making a decision is and like what drives you to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, have you ever like looked into like psychological theory like that, like Carl Jung at all, like psychology?
I know like a little Jung, but
yeah. Well, I mean, his big thing was that there is like a subconscious that is not who we are on the surface. You know what I mean? Yeah, and like the idea of us having to come to terms with that and like wrestle that beast. You know what I mean?
Hell yeah, dude.
And try to handle that. But I think, and I mean, this is just me. I don't know if he said this or not. But like, what about the idea that is like that subconscious is still part of you? You know what I mean? Like, while you can separate your logic dots from them, those are still coming up from your own brain. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they're coming up from your brain, but the way that I view the brain is like very mechanical.
Okay.
Like that's part of like the sciencey aspect of it. It's just like, it's atoms knocking around, dude. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I think about it. And for a little while before I got into science, in high school, I'd read a lot of like pop science. Okay. Like I read like Stephen Hawking's books. Like Brian Greene was my guy, and then I went to school for physics because I wanted to.
Yeah, because you were a nerd, right?
Because I was a nerd. I was a nerd, and I wanted to expand on that.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know. Doing actual science really kind of crushed a lot of the romanticism of science that you have, like, as a pop science enthusiast.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I can see that.
It's not like really as romantic or like broad as you think. Like the trite example is like the movie scientist that just knows all science.
Right.
Like I felt like I was just gonna, like, my brain was going to explode and I was like going to understand all of the universe because I was a new atheist and I was like, I need to fucking figure it all out, dude.
Yeah.
But it's just not really like that. But what was I fucking talking about? Oh yes, but the one thing is like before that I was thinking about like maybe the universe is like deterministic. You know what I mean? Like if there are laws of physics that govern the way that things move, right?
Right.
Like the way that they call that, like the slang term in physics is like billiard ball physics. Like one ball knocks into another ball, you know exactly what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was it, but then I was like, I learned about quantum mechanics.
Right.
And quantum mechanics is
Don't follow
is like not that.
Yeah.
And so then I had like a couple years of like, well, maybe everything isn't determined already. Like maybe we're not on like a natural path. But then I was like, you know, it's still based. I mean, I'm not articulating this well, but it's
no. I kind of, so like what my idea about free will is, I had a similar thing where, I mean, I grew up Catholic, right? And I went to church, right? And my thing was like, in Catholicism, that's one of the big parts of being Catholic, is they're like, everything is predetermined. Also, I was a big fan of Donnie Darko. I don't know if you've seen
Catholics think that everything is predetermined?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, predetermined by, it's called predestination, I think. But yeah, so my thing was, at that moment I was getting into Donnie Darko, which is also about predestination and a little bit about like how you control your fate and things like that. And I literally went up to the priest and I was like, why do we pray if everything is already predetermined? How is that going to influence everything?
Right.
And he's just like, well, God's already accounted for all the prayers. So I'm like, oh, okay. So,
like he accounted for the prayers that are going to happen in the future?
Yeah.
Is that what he's saying?
Basically, yeah. Time is a flat circle, dude. They already had everything.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. No. But I've kind of had a similar idea where it was like, I wanted to believe that I could, you know, change my fate, right?
Yeah.
But again, then there's just all this evidence that kind of goes against it. So it's like, then I watched this Adam Curtis documentary, and he talks about how back in the 50s they were doing experiments on just like looking at eyes, right? And an eye is a direct correlation to the brain, right?
Yeah.
And they would, you know, input some different types of stimulation going on and things like that. And what they realized is that your eye, like the way it expands and contracts and things like that, you don't control that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So the theory that came out of that at least Adam Curtis, the conclusion that he came to, was that there's so much activity going on in the brain other than what we can control that it's almost like it's being input from another dimension or something like that. You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, how much free will do we actually control versus are we just vessels of?
Well, here's the basic thought experiment that I think kind of like solidified it for me a little bit. Is like, I guess one thing that's also a little tenuous is like, what is free will actually? Mm-hmm. And the way that I'm defining it, and the thing that I think doesn't exist, is the idea that like, free will is like your ability to make a decision without outside influence.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, let's say you like take drugs, right? And then you do something, you're influenced by the drugs, right? Or you're influenced by your life experience, or like influenced by, you know,
your parents,
society, anything, right? Society, anything. And it's like a thing that operates that way. How could that exist? You know what I mean? You would have to be a non-interacting thing, which is something that in a physicsy sense is something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, you'd have to exist in a vacuum. Basically.
You would have to exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So what would it mean to make a choice without influence from the world around you? Mm. And so, like, I was talking to my one friend. He was like, "Well, what about like a partial free will?" And I was like, "What does that mean? How could you? What does that mean? Partial free will? How does it mean to make half a decision? Like that doesn't make any sense." Mm-hmm. So, I think from a purely like logical standpoint, it's pretty. I think a lot of people that I've talked to have like logically reasoned that like, yeah, the idea in a scientific sense doesn't necessarily make sense that you would have like a soul or free will. People that, you know, are more inclined towards atheism and really think that the body is an organic thing without a soul, I think that they can say like, yeah, it makes sense that we wouldn't have free will, but it really feels like we have it. Mm-hmm. So they kind of just go on that feeling. That's kind of what I was talking about before with mental health and like not trusting those feelings. Yeah. You can feel stuff that is like not true. You know what I mean? Like all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
And a friend of mine, he ended up doing philosophy of science after college, and he put it really well. He was like, the feeling that you have free will is just the feeling of not knowing what you're going to do. Like, just because you don't know what you're going to do, it really feels like you're making the choice. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like,
but in the end, you're always going to make that same choice.
Yeah.
I would disagree. And
okay, talk to me. What do you...
Yeah. Just because I've been in situations where the pros and cons were, is basically I was choosing between two different living situations, right?
Yeah.
And the pros and cons for each one were just added up, like, to be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation that I was having with people, basically it came back to, are you going to be happy with whichever one you go with?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, totally. Then just go you're just going to be fine. Just pick one, you know? Yeah. And so, like, the idea of that, and kind of this emerging theory in popular culture of, like, multi-dimensional timelines, you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
Again, you have to buy into that, and I'm not sure if I do or not, but I do believe in the power of choice, you know what I mean? And, like, have you ever seen Mr. Nobody with Jared Leto? You know, it's basically about this kid who, his parents are getting divorced, and they make him choose which one he's going to go with, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the whole idea is, the whole movie is all these future outcomes that play out based on the decision he makes in that moment.
Okay.
But the important thing being that he has to make a decision, you know what I mean? Especially, and think about this, especially if it's a kid who doesn't have full logical thought going into it, you know what I mean? How much free will plays into that?
Well, I think that seems a lot like a choice, right? But in the end, just because of the way that life works, you have to decide. Like, someone is going to decide, right?
Yeah.
You're going to make, your body is in one way or not other going to make the choice to advance your life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that necessarily means that, like, you have a soul that made some choice outside of your experience before that. Like, at the end of the day, I think the other complicated thing about free will is, like, if you view yourself as this collection of experiences and biology, and that's what's governing your choices, it's extremely complicated. You can't necessarily, you can't make predictions based on these things because there's too much data. There's way too much data for you to look through to guess what you're going to do. So it feels super random because you're doing a lot of background processing.
Right.
So, like, that kid is going to make one choice or another, and it might not even be super well reasoned. You know what I mean? Like you said, like, maybe he doesn't have, like, the greatest logical processing, so that choice is coming from somewhere. But it could just be random. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it could just be the kid saying, hey, I have to make a choice here, so I'm making a choice. Right. You know? But,
and so in that sense, I guess, are you saying that, like, no matter what, it's always going to be the same outcome? Because no matter what you believe, right? No matter whether you believe in free will or not, or you believe in whether that kid's using logic to dictate what he's going to do. You know what I mean? If he flips a coin, you think that coin is always going to land the same way?
No, not necessarily. Well, it's a good question. Maybe. I think pretty much the way I think about it is like do you ever hear of, like, the concept of, like, a chaotic system?
No.
There's like
all
right.
I can picture it, but let's see where
the classic example is, like, if you have, like, a pendulum and, like, you put it at some angle and you drop it and you let it go, we know exactly, like, how it's going to swing, how far, how long it's going to take, all that stuff. Right. But if you attach a pendulum to the bottom of that pendulum, double pendulum,
double
pendulum, and you let them both go, it's like the math gets so crazy that the tiniest, like, little millimeter of a difference in starting position leads to a totally different trajectory. Okay. So I think the world is just kind of like that. It's a big chaotic system where, like, it's unmappable. Like, there's so much there that, like, would this happen the same time every way? It's like, well, millimeter differences would say no, but if everything happens exactly the same way every time, it, like, to the literal, millionth of a degree, yeah, probably everything happens the same. Well, physically, I don't know, because quantum mechanics is weird. Right. And, like, that leads to, like, inherent probabilities and, like, governing things and, like, things kind of going one way or the other based on, like, raw chance. But that's, like, the fabric of what makes up the brain, you know what I mean? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so, and then, that's what I'm saying, like, in your idea of this, are you, calculating the fact that, quantum physics, like, there are things that don't make sense?
I don't think about this, like throughout my everyday life. Right. But it does inform my worldview to some degree, and the ways in which I think it's helpful, and what I was saying before, is like, oh, people should think this way. Yeah. Is, like, it lets you just trust your body to respond. You know what I mean? Like being like you were talking about being stuck between those two apartments. Yeah. Like, I would just be like, my body will tell me what to do and I'll figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, if something sucks about this, I'll pay attention to myself and, like, get that feedback and correct it. Yeah. And if I don't, or I'm sorry, if I do like it, then great. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah, I could see that. Ram Dass actually talks a little bit about this, but that goes into philosophy a little bit. But the point being, basically, you could prepare for a decision as much as you can, weighing the pros and the cons, doing the math, looking at each section. But in the moment, you're gonna make that snap decision no matter what, like what comes to you for the most part. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think so, and it's like it's such like hard language because like whenever you're talking about free will, you also have to talk about making choices, and the whole thing is that you're not making choices. Like I feel so I'm always thinking about like your body's making a choice.
True.
You know what I mean? Like I guess I was just saying like there's no I. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then what is like the thought process of choice that goes on in your mind when you have a decision to make? You know?
Dude, I'm just like super like mathy about it.
Okay.
Like I'll just be like, this will be good X%, this will be bad X%, and I try to choose that way, and like ignoring some like emotional responses. You know what I mean? Like, I think like a good example is like whenever you're like out of your comfort zone or like doing a new thing and like you feel like anxious and your body tells you to like not do it, but you have the data that like that's a natural emotional response to like doing a new thing, and doing new things are good. Yeah. And doing new things lets you get more data about yourself, which lets you make better informed decisions in the future. Like, I think like that way about stuff. Yeah,
and that's a good way to do it too. But you have to imagine that not everybody thinks that way.
Oh right? No, I know that almost everybody doesn't think that way. That much I do. I feel like I feel like a fucking weirdo, but but that's what I do, and I think it works for me. Like I said, I had like on a personal level, I had like I said, such shitty mental health, and like readjusting my worldview in this way and like compartmentalizing what I think about stuff has helped me enormously, along with antidepressants. But
and a lot of drugs.
And a lot of drugs.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I like, and that's what I'm saying though, is like I think your theory of like there being no free will accounts for the way that you think about the world, right? Yeah. But again, are there anomalies in how people, in that logic?
I think there are anomalies insofar as we don't understand it. Right. Like things seem anomalous because, like I said, there's just such an enormous amount of data that it's impossible to parse it. So another thing that some of my friends will say sometimes when I talk about it, they say, yeah, maybe there's no free will, but for all intents and purposes, you just have to act as if you do because it feels so much like it. Everyone's operating under that assumption. Yeah. And that's how it is, Right. I think the only times whenever it really could, like, benefit you to think differently is to consider, like, I guess on a basic level, it just makes you more empathetic. Like, if your worldview is such that, like, everyone is much more a sum of their, experiences, then you're constantly empathizing with people and trying to understand why they're doing X, Y, or Z, and that will help you have better relationships. It'll help you like control your own negativity and toxicity a lot more. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you're always trying to understand where people are coming from.
Yeah. I get what you mean. So kind of like viewing it from the reactionary perspective a little bit more. Yeah. Whereas like, because again, I don't disagree with your view on free will. You know what I mean? I don't know. Is the thing, right? I have no idea. But the thing is, like, if it's not a decision that we can make, like your friends were saying, is like, it's not like I can just let things happen. You know what I mean? It's like, you can, but there's some amount of thought and process that's going to go into that.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to stop you're not just going to stop, like, living. Right. Like, you're not just going to, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because, well, also, I mean, it makes sense because, like, through my experiences, I've learned that, like, I like to be alive. You know what I mean? My body likes living, dude. Like, I like to eat good food. You know what I mean? I like to do whatever. Yeah. So, like, I'm going to keep doing that stuff. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so you're...
And doesn't, like... That's what I'm saying is, like, I feel like it's also, like, people think this viewpoint is, like, so gloomy. You know what I mean? But, like... You don't have to stop enjoying stuff. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, and so to kind of go back to like the reactionary perspective, this is what I wanted to lead into. Sure. Because that is another thing that happens within philosophy, right? When you look at the idea of free will, is understanding that if there is no free will, which I don't think, which most philosophy, I think, science leads to. Yeah. Like I said, that, those experiments where it's like, you're just being controlled. You're just a puppet, basically. Yeah. But in that sense, you're right. I think it makes it so much easier to rationalize people doing good things and people doing bad things,
Yeah, so that's, I think, one of the really, like, problematic things that come out of having, like, really believing in free will is that, like, I think, like, politically is like politics is a great example. I think a lot of people think that like everyone has my experience and my worldview and they see the world the same, and these people are choosing to be the bad guys. That's crazy. Like, what a crazy thing to do. So I feel like if more people, I don't know, I feel like if more people adopted a perspective like this, it would be much more about like educating other people, you know what I mean, rather than
and kind of accepting
attack.
Well, and I think that goes into the mental health aspect too, is if you're able to accept this mentality, then, you know, like you said, you can empathize a little bit more with people, and you can understand that maybe they didn't attack you on purpose, or they didn't hurt you on purpose.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a product of, you know, how they are being controlled right now.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with Alan Watts is big on this. He's like, I don't believe in good or bad, to be honest with you.
Well, I don't believe in good or bad people, for sure.
Okay.
I think like ethically in terms of good and bad, it's like I have a really like small how do I put it? Like a very like simplistic view of like what's good and bad. Like good is like joy and happiness and lack of suffering, and bad is the opposite.
Right. And
you can kind of like superimpose that on whatever. But in terms of like people, there are people that have a bad influence and create suffering. But I think that they're like again, no free will, just carrying out whatever their circumstances.
Right. Well, it's like, say the world is represented by the yin and the yang. You know what I mean? There's got to be both, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like these people they didn't choose to become, you know, people that incur suffering on others, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
They're just kind of that way, you know what I mean? So, you know, saying that there are bad people is just putting judgment on the system that we existed, you know?
Yeah. I think too, it's like people have like, because they view things like that, like they have this perception of like good people and bad people, they get really into the idea of like justice being like a balancing factor.
Right.
Whereas like, you know, like I don't know, like someone does something fucked up and then everyone like attacks them on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I think it's good to acknowledge whenever people do something that's like problematic or whatever, like calling people out is important. But like I feel like the way that we go about like inflicting punishment as a society, outside of like, well, jail, perfect example. Like jail is like is proven to like not be a good source of rehabilitation, but it's a source of punishment.
Right.
But people will like really believe in this idea of yin and yanging, like this person did bad, so we do bad to them, and now everything is even and good.
Yeah. Instead
of having a system of being like actual rehabilitation and like taking a person that does bad and like make them do better. You know what I mean? And I think like socially we do a similar thing. Like whenever like someone said like J.K. Rowling says is a TERF, you know what I mean? Like, you know, everyone like attacking and dogpiling on her and stuff like that. It's like, I think it's good to call out bad behavior, but I feel like we're not doing a good job of like re-educating problematic people. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's and that.
Am I going off on a huge tangent here? It's getting me canceled.
Oh yeah, but so you agree with J.K. Rowling?
No. Yeah, I just think like I don't know. I just think that like I don't know. Discourse could be better. I feel like people think that like I just think that if everyone had a more empathetic perspective, we could do a lot better job of like re-educating people. Like politically, I would consider myself closest to like a leftist, but I think the leftist community is so shitty about teaching people about leftism. Like it's all about like attacks and justice and like doing justice on this like MAGA mom that like doesn't know anything else. Right. You know?
So like educating that person from a place where emotion and feelings don't get involved.
Yeah, because people are gonna get mad, but like if you can like master those feelings and like try to help that person, you know what I mean? Like do you remember that old like Bill Burr joke about the Duck Dynasty guy being like against gay marriage, and he's just like, what did you think this guy thought, dude? Like this fucking old ass Southern dude with a beard in like a fucking swamp. Like obviously that's how what this guy was taught his entire life. Like, you know, and attacking him in the way that we attack people is not going to change his mind.
Yeah, not at all.
Because people have their worldview and they're like, oh, I'm a sane person and I think this thing, and now all these other people are attacking me. Like, obviously they're crazy, dude. Like, because I am normal. I am sane. Everyone thinks that they're the sanest person, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, but the thing about that is, that's hard to educate people is because, like, that Duck Dynasty motherfucker isn't going to change his mind.
That's true. I mean? Actually, as I'm saying, it's impossible. There's
nothing
we can do.
There's nothing we can do. You know what I mean? So, and it kind of comes back to that free will, this conversation where it's like, that person is going to live their life no matter what. I think, and this is, I think intent is important. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think there is some sort of like, this kind of comes back to the balance of like letting things happen, right? Like, yeah, there's no free will. Things are just going to happen the way they're going to happen. But I think there is like a certain amount of intent that you can put into maybe a decision or into re-educating people that, again, maybe it probably won't play out in the way that you want it to. But just putting the intent in that I think makes your personal experience important because you're trying to impose some sort of will, you know?
I guess, so I guess it's because just hard. It's just hard to actually, like, these are all good things to think about, but it's so hard to actually implement.
I would agree, but if you're not imposing if you're not trying to impose any sort of will on your surrounding world, right? Your world, your life, then what do? You're just letting the world beat you up?
No. I mean, I think that's like a big part of like thinking this way is that things are products of their influences, and you are also an actor in that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know what I mean? Like, making people feel good is good, and that also, like, it's a feedback loop. Like, if people say, like, oh, you shouldn't give a fuck if people like you, dude, your life is so much better if people like you. You should try to get people to like you, because if people like you, they're nice to you, you have a better day, too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you create this feedback loop of influence, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So, I mean, you know, it's all a balance, right? Like of you know, understanding and believing or not believing in free will.
Yeah.
But working with what that means, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they hear like we were just saying, like they hear like, oh, you don't believe in free will. They think that you just stop being alive, but you can use that information to make your life better if like you enact it in a certain way.
Right.
And similarly, I mean, like I said, there's like a million different paths. I got this other friend, he's really into Buddhism, and he was like, and we were talking about this kind of stuff, and he was just like, oh, you're just like a Buddhist, but you don't know anything about Buddhism. And I was like, I guess that's true. It's just a million paths to like the same kinds of conclusions.
Sure. And I mean, and if you take, you know, God as, you know, outside of religion, but if you look at God, basically, I mean, it's the same thing. And I think a lot of people know this, right? That every religion is just the same path to the same outcome of just becoming part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just being it, you know?
Yeah, but religions also obviously come with all that extra baggage, too.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think there's a certain aspect of religion that is spiritual, but then there's a certain aspect of it that's traditional. And Yeah. It's the whole conventional thing that we don't like about religion.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You want money, it's fine. It's fine. Take your money, leave. But, yeah. But yeah, that is interesting because that does kind of sound like a Buddhist philosophy.
It is, it like the perspective that I have is like we're all a fucking soup, dude. You know what I mean? We're all soup touching each other. We're all little soup molecules. Yeah. And like you can like put out good vibes into the rest of the soup.
It's gonna change the flavor.
It'll change the flavor. Make that flavor good, dude. Yeah. And that flavor comes back to you. Your soup particle. Your soup is looking good. Like
And those that are and those that are opposite of you, maybe they're not a bad flavor. Maybe they're just adding a little spice or depth or something. You know what I
mean? That's why I talk so much about trying to re-educate people more than like attack them. You know what I mean? And having them dig further into their own. Because I want that part of the soup to be good too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't just want to kill that part of the soup. I want that soup to be better and make the other parts of the soup that are also bad better. I want all the soup to have a chain reaction.
Yeah, and maybe some bomb ass soup. Make some soup of the day, dude. Yeah. Exactly, man. That's definitely.
I feel like I have made like literally no fucking sense this entire time we've been talking. Is any of this coherent at all?
I think it's coherent. I think you're articulating well. It's a tough topic.
It's so hard to talk
about, dude. And that's the other thing, like with philosophical conversations, is that like I feel like oftentimes there isn't a real conclusion. You know what I mean?
No.
There's not a real. It's more of a speculative thing. It's funny. I think it was. Socrates was in a...
Okay. Bringing up Socrates?
I know. But he was in... But I'm not even siding with Socrates in this moment. He was going against a politician, right? They would have arguments like out in public.
Yeah.
And the politician, basically stated this thing where it's like philosophy is a young man's game and politics is like an older man's game.
Okay.
And it stuck with me because it kind of makes sense. Like as you're like coming to these realizations that, you know, the things we're talking about right now, they have weight. They have, you know, the realistic, you know, it's a mentality that can be played out in your daily life, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, you're not. Again, you're not coming to any conclusions with these things. This is just like a mathy thing that you're putting together, right?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, and then the older people, and again, I don't even know how much I agree with it, but I think there's a certain point where it's like, all right, I guess I just do now instead of just being. I gotta do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that those things can like bleed into each other a little bit. But yeah, like we were saying before, it's like it's not like you're going around at the store and you're thinking about like, oh, dude, this cashier is not really making these decisions about shit. But it does have an impact in terms of like I was saying about like not getting angry with people in situations when I used to get angry. Like it can bleed into how you see things. Mm-hmm. Also, kind of negatively too. Now that I'm thinking about it. I'm getting pretty like black-pilled about like just the world. You know what I mean? Like I because I see things as like this like almost deterministic path. You know what I mean? I think there's just like no way out of like, you know, climate change and like the political turmoil that we're in right now. I think in this sense, there's actually nothing that can be done, and I think that we're all just kind of fucked. Yeah. Because you have that like deterministic, no free will worldview a little bit. So maybe there's bad stuff too. Maybe no one should think this actually. But I don't know. So it can seep into like how you feel about things. Yeah. But it might not be glaringly obvious.
Yeah, I think those are two different ideas. I don't think
what do you mean?
Considering that like free will doesn't exist has to be mutually. I don't think that bleeds into the idea that everything is already fucked and on the path to becoming fucked. You know what I mean?
I don't think that they have to, but it's just like I think that part of what now I'm like contradicting everything I was saying before. I feel like changing people's minds is so hard. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because like I see them as like you know, these big data machines that are like fucking they're impenetrable because everyone has their whole life of experience, and like one person saying something to them to try to change their mind is not necessarily going to outweigh all of their experience to that point. And I feel like there's enough people that are in important positions that are actually controlling everything that cannot get off their path. They can't be re-educated because there's such a huge amount of influence that they've experienced already.
Yeah, I mean, what it would take for that to happen is a major like civilization collapse. You know what I mean?
That's what I mean. Like yeah. So basically, I'm not saying that we'll go extinct, but I think something like that.
Oh, for sure.
Is going to happen.
Yeah, but that's how history goes. You know what I mean?
That is how history goes.
Yeah. So it kind of comes back to the mentality of not feeling upset about that. You know, not letting your emotions get in the way of being like, well, at least my life I can make tolerable until I die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And by doing that, you know, and that's what I'm saying is like when it comes back to the idea of trying to share this mindset with people and educate them like that. I mean, you could try. That's the intent you can put out in the world. But again, that's only if that makes you happy to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I just think that, you know, again, as far as civilization goes, yeah, we're fucked. But that doesn't have to affect your individual life where it makes any of your beliefs, you know, contradict each other or
well, I guess what I was saying is like part of the good part of believing in free will is that like you believe that you have the influence to change people, but also I think again in practice it's very difficult. So maybe it's not worth it actually re-educating anyone because maybe it's impossible. I really don't know how I actually feel about that.
Yeah, because well, like I said, I think it comes back to whether you enjoy doing that or not.
I guess I do. Yeah.
So if you enjoy doing that, then it's totally worth it for you. It doesn't matter if it's actually going to change the flavor of the soup or not. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like the process of what makes your individual self happy about that. You know.
No, dude, that's such a good perspective. That's true, dude. That's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I think about it too is like the development over my life of the political arguments I have with my stepdad. Like, whenever I was in high school and a kid and stuff, dude, I would just fucking lose it. We would scream at each other.
Oh, man.
He would get rid of my video games, dude.
Damn.
He bought me a Green Day Rock Band. Took it back over an argument about George Bush.
Damn. Took a stepdad?
Took it
Classic
back.
Stepdad.
Took it back to the store, dude. I was ready to play American Idiot and shit.
Wow.
But now that I'm older, and I think it helps a lot that I don't have to see him as much, and there's gaps. I feel like we have like much more like helpful conversations, you know what I mean? Where like he can like ask me questions and I can like try to genuinely answer them instead of getting pissed that he doesn't know it already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, at least a lot of the people that I've talked to that have had fairly nuclear lives where you grow up in a household with parents and things like that. I think nuclear is the right word in that situation.
I've heard it used like that, I think.
Yeah. But, you know, fairly simple, you know, growing up with parents and then moving out of the house, right? You're going to hate your parents from probably like 15 to like 18.
Dude, they don't get it. That's the thing about parents.
Yeah.
They never get it.
They just don't understand me, you know? No, but then after that, like, it was the same way for me. I mean, there was, of course, like a couple years where you need to, like, you know, go out and do your own thing.
Yeah.
But I think that allows you, especially when you're not living with that person and seeing them day to day, you know, it's easy, like you said, it's easy to get mad at somebody who, you know, didn't flush the toilet last time you went in there or something like that. Yeah. But, you know, when you don't live with that person, you can come at them a little bit more level-headed, have more productive conversations about things that you both believe in. And it's great because you still do have that background with that person. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad that you have good conversations with your stepdad,
We're killing it now.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, were there any other points that you wanted to hit about free will? 'Cause
I feel like I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like I haven't said anything. You know what I mean? I feel like I've made no sense. It's just like, I don't know. No one has free will. Free will sucks.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's the conclusion.
That's the
free will sucks. But the perspective on free will doesn't have to suck.
No, it doesn't have to suck. I think that you can have much more productive and less like hugely emotional responses to people if you can accept that they're, you know,
imperfect
a product of uncontrollable influences, and like you can actually work to try to help them see your perspective rather than digging them further into their own worldview that is already so different and problematic from yours.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
That's my big takeaway about free will is like it's really just being empathetic is the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's just exercising empathy a little bit more. I think there's like a million sciencey reasons why you can come to the conclusion that there is no free will, but it's just so hard to really accept it because it just feels weird.
Unnatural, yeah.
It's weird. It really feels like we have it.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good takeaway. That's a good lesson, I think.
That's my lesson.
I think we're good to wrap it up, dude. Thanks for coming out. Instagram, dude?
Josh Kleckner Comedy. I wouldn't follow it, dude. There's nothing on there.
You post shows and stuff sometimes, you know.
Open mics.
Yeah, open mics.
It's 700, dude. Come to 700.
Yeah, you on Booze and Confused, dude.
I'm on Booze and Confused tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. Oh, that's tomorrow?
That's tomorrow. I've got the 2nd and 4th Sundays of August, Top Tomato.
Nice. Top Tomato?
Yeah.
Bar? Damn, yeah, I know where that is. I knew it as a bar. I didn't know they did comedy there.
They do now, dude. They didn't before.
Yeah. Do you want to plug the podcast?
Nope.
All right, not plug the podcast. All right, well, thanks so much, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
Stuff. Yeah.